Hey everybody, Adam here. Hope you're doing well. So, 3.5 years ago, my wife and I decided to move into a tiny house. And yeah, that's where we've been living for the last 3.5 years with our 2 dogs. So I thought I'd make a video talking about some of the common myths and misconceptions about tiny houses. In case you're thinking about moving into a tiny house, you can, know what you're really in store for. So yeah, I'll just dive right into it. So number 1, tiny houses are easy to build. So when I started building our house several years ago, I was a total amateur, and I quickly found out that tiny houses are not easy to build. At least not as easy as they often tend to look online. I think because they're small, that's where people get this idea from. But other than the size, building a tiny house is really not any different than building any other kind of conventional home. And sometimes, in certain ways, it can actually be more challenging because your space is so limited. So you have to get really clever with where to put appliances and furniture and all that kind of stuff. So if you're somebody with no building experience at all, and you're thinking that you're going to build a tiny house for yourself because you think it's going to be really easy, it's not going to be as easy as you probably think it is. You should probably do a lot of research, maybe get someone to help you, get some practice. Because, I made a lot of mistakes building our house because I was just figuring stuff out as I was doing it. Number 2, tiny houses are good for the environment. Other than the fact that they're small, so they require less energy, there's nothing else about a tiny house that automatically makes it better for the environment than any other home. No matter what kind of building it is, a lot of that is really going to depend on what you build it out of. I mean, I would say on average, tiny houses tend to lean more towards the eco-friendly side, but I'm also seeing a problem, and it's right next to me over here on this property. All too often, I'm seeing people build tiny houses, and then they quickly abandon them because they quickly find out that they don't like living in a tiny house. Several people to that property over here, to my left, have built numerous tiny houses on that property, and they have all abandoned them in typically less than a year. And it's just a waste of building materials. It's a waste of concrete, waste of wood. And they're just going to sit there forever until the materials deteriorate. They're not ever going to sell them. No one's ever going to buy them. They're not going to be broken down and repurposed. They're just abandoned buildings, essentially. So, yeah, I am seeing some wastefulness in the tiny house movement. And that's why I am making videos like this, telling people the reality. So maybe they think twice before committing to a tiny house. Number 3, tiny houses cost less than traditional homes. This one's kind of tricky. Typically speaking, the total cost of a tiny house is less than most conventional homes, but we also have to look at the cost per square foot. Right now in America, the median cost per square foot is about $100, maybe a little more. But I've seen tiny houses that are 150 square feet on wheels, and the seller wants $65,000. And in a scenario like that, the cost per square foot goes up to more than $400. So, yeah, and this is just a hypothetical, but yeah, $65,000 is going to be much cheaper than most homes, but you're only getting 150 square feet. So that's something to consider. Another thing to consider is that tiny houses don't appreciate like conventional homes. And that's because they're not fixed to a property. Conventional homes go up in value when the whole area goes up in value, because it's not just about the house itself, it's about the property that it's on and the location that it's in and the value of all the other buildings around it. But again, with tiny houses, that's usually not the case. They're usually not tied to any property. They're oftentimes just transient and mobile. So I think I view them more as a asset that's going to depreciate, like a car or an RV. And also you have to consider that there isn't the same kind of demand to buy tiny houses as conventional homes. So selling one could potentially take a pretty long time, because there's only a certain kind of person that wants a tiny house. Number 4, tiny houses can solve homelessness. This has sort of already been tried out, and it's not really the case. I do think that tiny houses can help with homelessness, but I don't think they're the singular long-term solution for a few reasons. One of the reasons is because most human beings don't like living in really small, confined spaces for long periods of time. It can have really damaging psychological effects on some people. And I realize that something is better than nothing, but really small spaces are best for short-term temporary living situations, not long-term permanent solutions. Another problem is, right now, the estimation is that there's about 500,000 homeless people in America. And of course, that's not even considering the rest of the world. From a land use perspective, if we were to build many, many thousands of individual tiny homes, that's not an efficient way to use the land. It's much more practical to build vertically. It's also better to build vertically from a utilities perspective. It's easier to supply utilities to one large building than several individual buildings. And then there's also that cost per square foot issue, which is like, to put thousands of people in tiny homes, to make it economical, they're not going to be the nicest homes. They're going to be done pretty cheaply, hastily. They're not going to be like the tiny houses you see on Instagram and Pinterest. They're basically just going to be like shacks with utilities. So again, I think that they are a useful tool in helping out with the homeless problem by giving people temporary places to stay, but I don't think they're the overall solution. And then number 5, tiny houses are a viable option for most people. So, and you know, I'm actually kind of guilty of this myself, because my wife and I were always telling people, oh, you should build a tiny house, you should live in a tiny house. They're not really a viable option for most people, and that's mainly because in most parts of the country, there's nowhere to put them. In most municipalities, they don't meet the building code requirements. They don't follow the zoning regulations or match up with those guidelines. So they're illegal to live in. And then your only option is to either travel in it constantly and live in it that way, kind of like living on the road in an RV, or to put it on someone else's land. But a lot of people can't or don't want to do that. One of the reasons my wife and I left Florida is because we had nowhere to put our tiny house, and we didn't want to live in mom and dad's backyard. And no offense to mom and dad, but you know, we're grown-ups, we're adults, we want our own place. So yeah, that's one of the main reasons we ended up leaving the state. So, and then also, you know, there are people who have large families, people with 3-4 kids, multiple pets. There's only so small they can go and still live a comfortable lifestyle. So yeah, not a viable option for everyone. In fact, I think it really takes a certain kind of person to be able to live in a tiny house, especially for a long period of time. So hopefully this video was helpful. Hopefully that maybe answers some curiosities for people who are thinking about living in a tiny house. And I will see you guys in the next video.